The USA, Britain and the USSR were working together during World War II to defeat the common enemy of Nazi Germany. In some ways this was an unlikely alliance. It became known as the Big Three, and it was an unlikely alliance because of the huge ideological differences between the USSR, which was a communist country, and the USA and Britain, which were both capitalist countries. But it seemed an alliance of convenience, born out of the harsh reality of the Second World War and the need to defeat Germany. As the war progressed, there were a series of 3 wartime conferences that were to decide what would happen at the end of the war, and that's what we're going to focus on today. The Tehran Conference was the first of 3 World War II peace conferences. This conference began in November 1943, and the leaders of the Big Three present were Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin. The atmosphere for this conference was very positive. It wasn't clear at this point that Germany would be easily defeated, and therefore there were a number of areas of common agreement. The USA and Britain agreed to open a second front against Germany. Stalin in return agreed to declare war on Japan after the defeat of Germany. All parties agreed to aim for the unconditional surrender of Germany and to set up an international body to settle disputes, and this later became the United Nations. However, although this was a very positive meeting, Churchill wasn't happy about where the second front was going to be. So although Stalin was happy that there was going to be a second front opened, Churchill had wanted this not to be in Western Europe, but to be in the Baltic. There was also a fear that after the war, and this came from Churchill, that the Big Three would just become the Big Two of the USA and USSR. The second of the wartime peace conferences was held at Yalta in February 1945, again attended by Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin. By this point, it was becoming clearer that Germany would be defeated, and the focus of the conference was a lot more on what would happen to Germany. It was agreed that Germany, after the war, would be split into 4 zones, one each administered by Britain, France, the USA and USSR. That Germany would pay $20 billion in reparations, the majority of which would go to the Soviet Union. That the organisation, the United Nations, would be set up. That free elections would be held in Eastern Europe, although the understanding of what free elections meant differed between the USA and USSR. And it was also agreed that Stalin would join the war against Japan. However, tensions began to emerge during this conference. There was disagreement over Poland and what would happen to it, and there was disagreement about whether all the Soviet republics would be allowed to join the United Nations. The third of the wartime conferences occurred at Potsdam between the end of July and early August 1945. Truman by now was the new leader of the USA, having replaced Roosevelt, who died earlier that year. Attlee replaced Churchill as the new Prime Minister of Britain right on the eve of the conference, and so he attended as the new leader for Britain, but Stalin was still the one constant in these meetings and attended also. It was agreed at this conference that Germany would still be split into 4 zones after the war, but Germany was intended to be run one whole economy. The city of Berlin, which sat inside the Soviet zone, was to be divided into 4 zones. But relations became more strained at this meeting because agreement could not be reached over the government of Eastern Europe and Poland, and also Truman let it be known to Stalin that the USA had in fact now developed the atomic bomb. So there were more strained relations at this conference.